A proud count rejects the woman he loves to preserve his name before society. In front of everyone, he humiliates her, erasing any connection between the two. Years later, she returns stronger, occupying the place he said was impossible. And now, it is he who must prove that he is no longer the man who destroyed her. If you like love stories and romance, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave your comment saying where you are listening to this beautiful story from. We continue. Santa Helena Farm existed even before São Paulo became the metropolis it was now. Its lands had seen the coffee cycle, industrialization, the modernization of agribusiness, and through all of it, the name Almeida Sampaio remained untouched, engraved on bronze plaques, historical documents, and in the collective memory of those who understood what tradition meant in that country. Rafael Almeida Sampaio grew up knowing exactly the weight he carried on his shoulders. It wasn't just a surname, it was a heritage, a responsibility, a code of conduct that came before any personal desire. Since childhood, he learned that feelings were dangerous luxuries. His grandfather, a severe patriarch who ruled the family business with an iron fist, always repeated the same lesson during formal dinners at the farm's main house. An Almeida Sampaio does not cry. An Almeida Sampaio does not show weakness. An Almeida Sampaio does not bow to emotional whims. The surname comes before everything. Before you, before me, before any of us. Rafael listened, absorbed, internalized. At 10 years old, when his mother died in a car accident returning from a charity party in Campinas, he did not shed a tear at the wake. He remained by his father's side, standing, serious, greeting each person who arrived with the composure expected of him. That night, alone in his room, he buried his face in the pillow and cried in silence until he fell asleep. But no one could know that. No one could see. Rafael's life was a succession of social commitments, business meetings, dinners at traditional clubs and charity events where everyone knew exactly who he was even before being introduced. He studied administration at one of the country's best private universities, did an MBA in the United States, and returned prepared to take over the management of the family businesses. At 32, he commanded 3 companies of the Almeida Sampaio Group, participated in administrative boards, and was photographed in social columns alongside other traditional families from São Paulo. His life had a script, a screenplay, and rehearsed movements. And it worked perfectly, like a well-oiled machine. But behind the efficiency, there was a void he had learned to ignore. A feeling that all of it was a perpetual performance, a role he played so well that he no longer knew who he would be without the costume. His relationships followed the same pattern. Women from known families, educated in the same circles, who understood the rules of the social game. Courtships that lasted long enough to appear in a few photos, formal dinners, and trips to approved destinations. Nothing too intense, nothing that threatened his control. When they ended, it was always in a civilized, almost bureaucratic way. No scandals, no drama, no inconvenient feelings. It was on a March afternoon, during an administrative visit to Santa Helena Farm, that Rafael met Laura. She had been working at the main house for a few months, hired by the administrator to help organize an event the family would host for agribusiness investors. She came from a small town in the interior of Minas Gerais, where she was born and raised helping her mother raise her younger siblings after her father died in a construction accident. At 24, she had little formal education, but a practical intelligence and a silent dignity that drew attention. Rafael saw her for the first time organizing chairs in the farm's main hall. She didn't notice his presence immediately, concentrated on aligning each row with millimetric precision. She wore a simple navy blue dress, her hair tied in a practical bun. Nothing about her asked for attention, but there was something in the way she moved, in the seriousness with which she treated every detail of that apparently simple task, that made him stop at the entrance of the hall and just observe. When she finally noticed his presence and turned around, there was a second of surprise in her eyes. Not the reverent recognition he was used to receiving, but just genuine surprise at finding someone there. She quickly composed herself, wiped her hands on her apron and asked if he needed anything. Her voice was low, polite, without excess. Raphael said he was just inspecting the preparations. She nodded and went back to work. She didn't try to start a conversation, didn't show nervousness, and didn't ask unnecessary questions. She just continued aligning the chairs. That quiet indifference intrigued him. He was used to people who bowed, who flattered, who tried to impress. Laura simply did her job. In the following days, Raphael found excuses to circulate through the main house more than necessary. He checked details he would normally delegate and inspected arrangements he had never cared to inspect before. And he always saw her, in some corner, organizing, cleaning, preparing, never idle, never complaining, never seeking attention. The first real conversation between them happened on a rainy afternoon. Raphael was in the farm office reviewing contracts when he realized he had forgotten an important document in the main house. The rain was falling hard, but he needed that paper. He ran across the garden and arrived soaked on the porch. Laura was there, folding tablecloths she had taken off the clothesline before the storm arrived. She looked at him, at his wet clothes, at his muddy Italian shoes, and for the first time he saw something like a smile on her lips. "You are soaked," she said, without trying to hide the obviousness of the situation. Raphael looked at himself and, for the first time in a long time, laughed. A genuine laugh, without calculation, without considering how it would be seen. She disappeared for a moment and returned with a clean towel. He dried his face and hair. They stayed there on the porch, listening to the rain fall while she continued folding the towels with precise movements. And he tried to understand why that simple scene seemed more real to him than any social event he had attended in recent years. They began to talk, first about trivial things, the weather, the organization of the event, practical details, but gradually the conversations deepened. Raphael discovered that Laura read a lot, that she borrowed books from the farm's small library and always returned them on time, that she had her own opinions on politics, economy, and society. Nothing academic, nothing elaborate, but practical and intelligent observations from someone who saw the world from a completely different angle than his. She didn't try to impress him with sophisticated vocabulary. She spoke directly, honestly, without beating around the bush. And Raphael found himself sharing things he had never told anyone. The weight of the surname, the feeling of living a life that wasn't exactly his, the loneliness of always being surrounded by people, but never truly seen by any of them. Laura listened without judgment, without hasty advice. She just listened. And that silent attention was more liberating than any therapy he had ever considered doing. Their meetings became more frequent, always discreet, always at times when there weren't many people around. A quick conversation in the garden early in the morning, a shared coffee in the kitchen of the main house when everyone had already left, walks through the property at sunset, when Raphael made up reasons to inspect fences, gates, and plots of land. Laura accompanied him when she could, and they talked about everything and nothing. She told him about life in the interior of Minas, about the difficulties of raising her younger siblings, about the dreams she had to postpone so they could study. He spoke about the pressure of always being perfect, of never being allowed to fail, of carrying expectations that weighed more than any fortune. There was something between them that Raphael didn't know how to name. It wasn't just physical attraction, although there was that too. It was a deeper connection, a feeling of being truly seen for the first time in his life. With Laura, he didn't need to be the heir of the Almeida Sampaio. He didn't need to perform, impress, or maintain appearances. He could simply be. And that freedom was at once liberating and terrifying. But Raphael knew it couldn't last. He knew there were clear limits, lines that should not be crossed. He was who he was. She was who she was. And the world they lived in did not allow those differences to be ignored. No matter how much he tried to silence that rational voice, it was always there, reminding him of the consequences, the expectations, and what would be said if someone found out. And someone did find out. Mauricio, Raphael's cousin and a minority partner in one of the family businesses, visited the farm late one afternoon and saw the two of them talking near the stable. They didn't do anything extraordinary. They just talked. But Mauricio knew Raphael well enough to notice something different in the way he looked at that woman, in the way he smiled, in the way he seemed completely absorbed in that conversation. 2 weeks later, during a lunch at the club, Mauricio casually mentioned that he had seen Raphael very much at ease with one of the farm employees. He said this in front of other family members and friends from their social circle, not as a direct accusation, but as an apparently innocent observation that carried all the weight of implicit judgment. Raphael felt all eyes turn to him. He saw the discreet smile on his cousin's lips. He realized exactly what was happening. A test, a provocation, an opportunity for him to reaffirm his position, his place, his priorities, and it was at that moment that Raphael understood he would have to choose. He could no longer live in that intermediate space, in that comfortable limbo where he pretended he could have both worlds. The pressure began to intensify in the following days. His father asked to talk, mentioning the importance of keeping the family image intact. He spoke about strategic marriages, about alliances that needed to be strengthened. He didn't mention Laura directly, but the message was clear. His grandfather, already in fragile health but still lucid, called Raphael for a private conversation and was even more direct. "We cannot afford scandals, Raphael, you know that. You were raised to understand that." Raphael knew. He had always known. But knowing didn't make the situation any less painful. He spent sleepless nights trying to find a way out, a way to reconcile what he felt with what was expected of him. But there was no way out. Not in that world, not with those rules. The launch party for the family's new real estate project was to take place at São Paulo's most exclusive club. 300 guests, all carefully selected. Businessmen, politicians, opinion makers, coverage by the social press. Everything meticulously planned to reinforce the image of solidity and tradition of the Almeida Sampaio. Raphael knew that would be his opportunity to end any speculation once and for all, to prove he was in control, that his priorities were in the right place. He asked Laura to attend the event. He said they needed more people from the farm team to help with the organization. She hesitated but eventually agreed. She suspected nothing. She had no reason to suspect. After all, they were just conversations, just friendship. Nothing had been explicitly said about what existed between them. Raphael clung to that ambiguity as if it were a justification for what he was about to do. On the night of the party, Laura arrived discreetly, wearing the simple uniform they had provided for her. She circulated among the guests serving canapés, collecting empty glasses, doing her job with the same silent efficiency as always. Raphael saw her from afar several times. Each time their eyes met, he quickly looked away. He kept himself surrounded by important people, talking about business, laughing at jokes he didn't find funny, playing his role with the perfection that had always been demanded of him. And then the moment came. Laura passed near the group where he was, carrying a tray. Someone made a casual comment about the quality of the service. Raphael could have let it pass. He could have simply agreed and changed the subject. But Mauricio was there, watching. His father was on the other side of the room, keeping an eye out. Other family members were dispersed throughout the environment, all attentive, all waiting to see how he would react. Laura tripped slightly, a nearly imperceptible movement, but one that made a glass on the tray wobble. Raphael saw the opportunity, and he took it. With a cold voice, calculatedly audible to those nearby, he made a comment about the need to hire more qualified personnel. He didn't yell, he wasn't obviously rude, but the tone, the way he looked through her as if she were invisible, as if they had never shared a single conversation, as if she were just another incompetent employee making mistakes at important events. The impact was devastating, exactly because of that, because of the coldness, because of the complete denial of any bond that existed between them. Laura stopped. She looked at him, and Raphael saw in her eyes the exact moment she understood everything. Not just what he had just done, but why. He saw the hurt, the disappointment, the humiliation. He also saw something harder, a door closing, a decision being made. She didn't respond. She didn't defend herself. She simply lowered her head, murmured an apology, and left the room carrying that tray with trembling hands. Raphael returned to the conversation as if nothing had happened. He accepted the approving smiles. He continued circulating through the event, fulfilling his role, but something inside him had broken. And he knew, even while trying to convince himself otherwise, that there was no turning back from that choice. Laura did not return to Santa Helena farm. On the morning after the event, when the administrator went looking for her to arrange the next jobs, she discovered that Laura had left the room she occupied at the back of the property. Her few clothes, her borrowed books carefully returned to the library. Everything was arranged with the same meticulous organization that characterized each of her actions. There was no note. There was no explanation. Only the silence of someone who decided she owed nothing more to anyone in that place. Raphael learned of her departure the same day. He felt a pang in his chest that he tried to ignore, burying himself in meetings, in contracts, in numbers that danced on spreadsheets without making sense. He told himself it was better this way, that she had understood the message and spared everyone further embarrassment, that it was the right thing, the necessary thing, the inevitable thing. But at night, alone in his apartment in Jardin, overlooking the illuminated city and the heavy silence of someone with no one to share that view with, his conviction began to crack. He tried to find her. At first, discreetly. He called the administrator asking if there was any form of contact. There wasn't. Laura had never left a phone number, only an address in Minas Gerais, which, when Raphael sent someone to check, turned out to be just a generic reference to her hometown. No one at that address knew her or knew where she had gone. It was as if she had simply disappeared, taken by the wind, in the same way she had arrived. The obsession grew silently. Raphael began to visit places Laura had mentioned during their conversations. A small church in Pinheiros she said she had visited on a Sunday. A public library downtown where she told him she used to go when she had time off. A street fair in Santo Amaro where she had bought a used book she gave him before everything fell apart. He circulated through these places like a ghost, looking for a face he knew he wouldn't find, but unable to stop looking. The months passed. Raphael fulfilled his obligations with the usual mechanical efficiency. He signed contracts, participated in meetings, and smiled at social events. But there was an absence in him that those close to him began to notice. A distance, a lack of enthusiasm that he used to know how to disguise better. His father attributed it to the pressure of business. His grandfather, already quite debilitated, rarely left the farm and didn't notice the changes. Mauricio, satisfied at having reaffirmed the natural order of things, occupied himself with strengthening his own position within the company. Raphael began a relationship with Helena, the daughter of a businessman in the financial sector. It was exactly the type of alliance his family expected. Helena was beautiful, educated, moved in the same circles, and understood the rules of the game. Dinners were pleasant, conversations were civilized, and the sex was adequate. Everything worked perfectly on paper. But Raphael knew, in every moment they spent together, that he was just fulfilling another script. Helena also knew, although she never said it. She accepted that domesticated version of affection because it was what all the women in her circle accepted. Marriages were strategic partnerships, with some superficial layer of affection. No one expected passion. No one expected a real connection. The engagement was announced 18 months after the party, where Raphael humiliated Laura. The photo appeared in all the social columns. Raphael and Helena, smiling, she displaying the diamond ring he chose with the help of a renowned jeweler. Everything planned, everything appropriate, everything empty. The wedding date was set for 6 months later, enough time to organize a ceremony worthy of the Almeida Sampaio. But something inside Raphael resisted. The closer the date came, the more he felt the weight of the choice he was making. It wasn't about Helena. She wasn't to blame for being exactly what that world expected her to be. It was about him. About the growing certainty that he was about to definitively bury any possibility of being anything other than what he had always been. The possibility died that night at the club, he tried to convince himself. But the attempt at conviction was, in itself, proof that something was still breathing in that place he tried to keep locked away. While Raphael sank into a life that felt more and more like a costume that was too tight, Laura was rebuilding her own existence brick by brick, far from the eyes that had diminished her. She had returned to Minas Gerais, but not to her hometown. She went to Belo Horizonte, where no one knew her, where she could start over without carrying the weight of old stories. The first months were brutal. Laura worked at a snack bar during the day, did cleaning at night and saved every cent. She lived in a tiny room in a cheap boarding house, shared the bathroom with 5 other tenants, and ate the bare minimum. But there was a determination in her that humiliation had forged. She didn't just want to survive. She wanted to prove, mainly to herself, that she was capable of much more than that world believed. At night, after work, Laura studied. She borrowed books from the public library, took free online courses, and learned the basics of administration, accounting, and management. She had an aptitude for numbers, she discovered, a capacity to visualize patterns, to understand cause and effect relationships that didn't depend on a university degree. It was practical intelligence, the kind that develops when every wrong decision could mean not having anything to eat at the end of the month. The turnaround began with something small. Laura noticed that the snack bar where she worked was losing money due to poor management. The owner, a 60-year-old man who had inherited the business from his father, didn't understand inventory control, pricing, or cash flow. She began to make discreet observations, practical suggestions. She reorganized the stock on her own, created a simple control system, and renegotiated with some suppliers using arguments she had learned in online courses. In 3 months, the snack bar was turning a profit for the first time in years. The owner, impressed, offered Laura a minority partnership. She accepted, but with one condition. She wanted to learn everything. She wanted to understand every aspect of the business, from the kitchen to the finances. And the old gentleman, with no children interested in continuing the work, saw in that determined young woman something worth more than any degree. He saw will. Laura gave herself completely. She worked 16 hours a day, learned fast, made mistakes, corrected them, and improved. Her share in the business grew as she proved her worth. When the owner decided to retire 4 years later, he sold the snack bar to Laura for a symbolic price. In practice, she was already the one running everything. The formalization was just recognition of the obvious. But Laura didn't stop there. She used the snack bar as a base to learn more, to connect with other small business owners, and to understand how the market worked. She began providing informal consulting to other establishments with similar problems. Her reputation grew silently in the small business circuit of Belo Horizonte. Laura, the woman who could save failing companies. Laura, who understood management without ever having stepped into a college. Laura, who didn't waste words and delivered results. With the money she accumulated, she invested, not in extravagant things, in formal education now that she could pay for it. She took a technical course in administration, then a degree in business management at a private university, studying at night while running the business during the day. She graduated with honors, being the oldest student in the class and the one who stood out the most. Professors commented on that discreet woman, always sitting in the front rows, who asked specific questions and demonstrated an understanding of concepts in an applied way, not just theoretically. Laura also changed on the outside, not ostentatiously but gradually. She began to take better care of her appearance, not out of vanity, but because she understood that presentation was part of the professional game. She got her hair cut at a decent salon, bought simple but well-tailored clothes, and learned to apply makeup discreetly. She took classes in posture, communication, and business etiquette, not because she wanted to belong to that world that had rejected her, but because she understood that to compete in any field, one had to know the rules. At 30, 6 years after leaving Santa Helena Farm, Laura was no longer the shy girl who organized chairs in silence. She was the owner of 3 small restaurants in Belo Horizonte, a respected consultant, had her own apartment in a good neighborhood, and a modest but functional car. More important than all of that, she had respect, from the people she worked with, from suppliers, from customers, and from the business community that saw her as someone who had achieved everything through genuine work. But the deepest transformation was internal. Laura had learned not to depend on anyone's approval. She had built a life that was entirely hers, without owing favors, without needing to bow down, without accepting crumbs of validation. The pain of that night at the club never completely disappeared. She still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night, remembering Raphael's cold look, the way he looked through her with calculated indifference. But that pain had been transformed into fuel. Every achievement was a silent response to that moment. Every step forward was proof that she was worth more than that man had decided she was worth. Laura held no hatred. Hatred required energy she preferred to invest in building things. But there was no easy forgiveness either. There was, instead, a well-stitched scar she had no intention of reopening. The past was the past, and she had a lot of future ahead of her. The Almeida Sampaio empire was crumbling. Not in a scandalous way, not with sensationalist headlines, but with the cruel slowness of an old structure that could no longer support its own weight. Agribusiness had changed, becoming more competitive, more technical, and less dependent on traditional names. The family businesses accumulated debts, lost market share, and survived more by inertia than by relevance. Raphael had taken full control after his grandfather's death 2 years ago. The marriage to Helena lasted only 18 months before ending in a civilized divorce that surprised no one. She moved on with her life and married again, this time to someone who at least tried to fake feelings. Raphael was left alone, commanding a slowly sinking ship, trying to save what he could, selling assets, cutting costs, and postponing the inevitable. Santa Helena Farm, the crown jewel of the Almeida Sampaio, was in the process of being sold to a large agribusiness group. It was the only way to pay off the most urgent debts and keep the rest of the operations running. But the negotiation was stalled by a technical issue. Part of the land had an old documentation dispute, something no one had resolved decades ago because it never seemed important. Now it was. The buying group demanded that everything be perfectly regularized before closing the deal. It was the family lawyer who mentioned the name for the first time, Laura Mendez, a consultant specialized in land regularization who had resolved complex cases in Minas Gerais and was expanding operations to São Paulo. She had experience with old documentation, knew how to deal with notary offices, with public bodies, and with the bureaucracies that stalled processes like that one. She was, according to the lawyer, the best option to resolve that specific problem quickly. Raphael barely paid attention to the name. Laura was common, Mendez too. It didn't even cross his mind that it could be her. It had been 6 years. She had disappeared completely. She was probably somewhere in the interior of Minas, living a simple life, far from all of that. He authorized the hiring without thinking twice. He needed to solve that problem. The name of the person who would solve it was irrelevant. The meeting was scheduled at a corporate hotel on Avenida Paulista, neutral professional territory suitable for that type of negotiation. Raphael arrived 15 minutes early, as always. He was accompanied by the lawyer and an accountant. They prepared in the meeting room, organized documents, and reviewed the critical points. The lawyer mentioned that the consultant had a reputation for being direct, no-nonsense, and focused on results. Raphael appreciated efficiency. This would be quick and painless. The door opened, and Raphael's world stopped. Laura entered the room with the posture of someone who belonged in that environment. She wore a charcoal grey tailored dress, impeccably cut, discreet but visibly expensive, mid-heel shoes, an elegant leather bag. Her hair was loose, falling in controlled waves over her shoulders, subtle makeup that enhanced without exaggeration, small earrings, a thin watch on her wrist. Everything about her communicated professionalism, sophistication, and absolute control. She greeted the lawyer and the accountant with firm handshakes, smiled politely, and introduced herself clearly and objectively. And then her eyes met Raphael's. There was a second of recognition, just a second. Then her expression returned to perfect professional neutrality. She extended her hand to him. "Mr. Almeida Sampaio, a pleasure." Her voice was firm, without hesitation. Her hand did not tremble when it touched his. Raphael shook that hand as if in a trance, unable to fully process what was happening. Laura sat down, opened an organized folder, and began to explain the land regularization process with the precision of someone who completely mastered the subject. She spoke about deadlines, costs, necessary documentation, and the bodies that would need to be contacted. She used technical terms naturally and demonstrated deep knowledge of legislation, jurisprudence, and notary procedures. She wasn't the girl he had known, or rather, she was, and she wasn't. The essence was there, that practical intelligence he had always recognized, but now it was coated with a layer of formal knowledge, experience, and earned authority. Raphael could barely follow the explanation. He heard her voice, saw her lips moving, but his brain was short-circuiting, trying to reconcile the image he kept in his memory with the woman sitting in front of him. The lawyer asked questions. Laura answered with patience and clarity. The accountant raised a question about costs. She had the numbers on the tip of her tongue, presented a detailed spreadsheet, and justified every value. The meeting lasted an hour. At the end, Laura presented a formal work proposal, a 3-month deadline to resolve all the documentation, fees compatible with the market, clear clauses about each party's responsibilities, everything extremely professional, objective, with no room for ambiguity. Raphael agreed to everything without argument. The lawyer seemed satisfied. The accountant made some notes. Laura collected her documents and put everything back in the folder with precise movements. She stood up and shook everyone's hands again, including Raphael's. When her fingers touched his for the second time that day, he looked for something in her eyes, some sign that it affected her as much as it did him, but her eyes were empty of any emotion beyond professional courtesy. She left the room without looking back. Raphael sat there, still processing. The lawyer commented on how lucky they were to have found such a competent professional. Raphael nodded mechanically. He waited a few minutes, made an excuse, and left the room. He looked for Laura in the hotel hallway, in the lobby, in the parking lot. She had already gone. In the following weeks, Raphael tried to keep his distance from the process. He let the lawyer handle everything. But Laura needed documents only he could authorize, signatures and information only he had. Interactions were inevitable, always by email, always professional. She wrote direct messages, without unnecessary pleasantries. Mr. Almeida Sampaio, I need you to authorize access to File X. Thank you for your attention, Laura Mendes. Nothing more, nothing less. Raphael responded, trying to add some layer of personality. He mentioned they could meet to discuss details in person. She thanked him, but politely declined. Everything can be resolved by email or with your lawyer, he insisted. She maintained her distance. It was like trying to hug mist. The more he tried to get close, the more she slipped through his fingers without ever being rude, without ever giving him the opportunity to accuse her of anything beyond exemplary professional efficiency. The first inevitable face-to-face meeting happened a month later, when Laura needed to visit Santa Helena Farm itself to verify physical landmarks of the lands in dispute. Raphael insisted on accompanying her personally. He said he knew the property better and that it would be more efficient that way. In truth, he just wanted an opportunity to talk to her away from the formality of meeting rooms and lawyers. Laura arrived at the farm driving a discreet but new SUV. She got out of the car wearing practical but well-chosen clothes for fieldwork: leather boots, dark jeans, a long-sleeved button-down shirt, and a wide-brimmed hat. She carried a technical bag with measuring equipment. Raphael was waiting for her in front of the main house, on that same porch where he had once arrived, soaked by the rain, and she had offered him a towel. She greeted him with a nod, getting straight to the point. "Can we start? We have a lot of ground to cover." Raphael agreed. They walked in silence for the first few minutes, him showing the way, her making notes on a tablet. The sun was strong, typical of October in São Paulo. The air smelled of earth and pasture. It was impossible not to remember the other walks they had taken along those same trails, in another life, when they were still other people. "Laura," he began. She didn't look at him. She kept her eyes on the tablet. "Yes, Mr. Almeida Sampaio?" The formality was a physical barrier between them. "You can call me Raphael." She finally looked at him. Her eyes were different now. There was a hardness in them that didn't exist before. "I prefer to maintain professional formality, Mr. Almeida Sampaio. It is more appropriate." He swallowed hard. "We need to talk about what happened, about that night, about everything." Laura stopped walking. She turned completely toward him, and Raphael saw for the first time a crack in her professional mask. "I see no need to discuss the past," she said, her voice controlled but with tension underneath. "I am here to do a job, nothing more. I hope we can keep things at that level." Raphael took a step forward. "Laura, please, I need to tell you that—" She raised her hand, cutting him off. "Mr. Almeida Sampaio," she said, each word coming out precise as a blade. You made it very clear 6 years ago exactly what I meant to you. That message was received, loud and clear. You don't need to repeat it. You don't need to explain yourself. And I definitely do not need to hear it. She resumed walking, leaving him standing there. Raphael watched her walk away, that upright and determined figure occupying the space with an authority he never imagined she could have. And it was at that moment he fully understood what he had lost. Not just the sweet girl who talked to him on the porch, but the woman that girl had become. A woman who no longer needed him for anything. A woman who looked at him and saw only another client. Just another job to be completed. Raphael ran after her. "Laura," he called again, his voice more urgent now. She stopped but didn't turn around. "I looked for you," he said. "After that night, I looked everywhere. I couldn't find you." There was a long silence. When she finally responded, her voice was lower. "I didn't want to be found." The regularization work dragged on due to complications no one had foreseen. Old documents had illegible signatures, notary offices had changed archiving systems, and witnesses to old demarcations were dead or impossible to locate. Laura worked with her usual tenacity, but each obstacle added weeks to the initial deadline. Raphael followed the process closely, using professional necessity as an excuse to stay near her. The meetings became more frequent. Laura continued to maintain her professional distance, but the forced coexistence began to create cracks in the armor she had built. There were moments, brief and rare, when she forgot the formality. A spontaneous observation about some absurd bureaucracy, a discreet smile when Raphael made a sarcastic comment about the slowness of public bodies. Small gaps through which he glimpsed the woman behind the impeccable consultant. It was during one of these meetings that the first serious problem arose. Laura was negotiating with a particularly difficult notary official, a 50-year-old man who clearly did not take well to receiving orders from a woman, especially one who came from outside, without the traditional São Paulo connections. He made up obstacles, demanded unnecessary documents, and postponed procedures that could be resolved in days. Raphael noticed Laura's growing frustration, although she continued to maintain her professional composure. One afternoon, after another unproductive meeting at the notary office, he saw her sitting in her car in the parking lot, hands clenched on the steering wheel, eyes closed, breathing deeply. She wasn't crying. She was just trying to control the anger of someone who knows she is being deliberately sabotaged, but cannot react without appearing emotional, without confirming all the prejudices that man already had about her. Raphael knocked on the car window. Laura opened her eyes, cleared her expression, and rolled down the window. "Yes, Mr. Almeida Sampaio." He hesitated, then said, "Let me resolve this." She frowned. "I don't need you to resolve anything. I can handle this myself." Raphael shook his head. "I know you can, but you shouldn't have to handle it." And he said it in a different way, without condescension, without wanting to be a hero, just recognizing that she was facing an unfair situation he had the means to resolve. Laura studied him for a long moment. Then she nodded, too tired to keep fighting alone. Raphael made 2 calls, one to the judge who had been his father's college classmate, another to a city councilman who owed favors to the Almeida Sampaio family. He didn't threaten, he didn't pressure, he just casually mentioned that there was an irregular situation happening at that specific notary office and that it would be regrettable if it had to become a formal issue. 3 days later, the notary official who was creating obstacles was transferred to another unit. His replacement was professional, efficient, and had no personal agendas. The work moved forward. Laura didn't thank him directly, but something changed in the way she looked at Raphael. There was a question there, a reassessment. He didn't ask for anything in return. He didn't use it as a bargaining chip to get closer to her. He simply resolved it and moved on. And that discretion said more than any speech could say. Problems continued to arise. A group of local businessmen, bothered by Laura's success, began to spread rumors about her competence. They said her methods were questionable, that she used ethical shortcuts, and that she wasn't trustworthy. They were baseless rumors, but in a field where reputation was everything, they could be devastating. Laura found out when a potential client cancelled a meeting without a clear explanation. Then another, then a third. She investigated and discovered the source of the rumors. They were three men, owners of established consulting firms, who saw Laura as a threat. A woman, without a traditional surname, without family connections, winning clients that were previously their guaranteed territory. They wouldn't accept it, and they used the means they had to try to eliminate her from the game. Raphael found out when he heard one of them making derogatory comments about Laura at a business event. He felt the anger rise, hot and urgent, but he didn't react impulsively. He waited. He researched. He discovered that one of the three businessmen had serious tax evasion problems he kept hidden. Another had a history of labor lawsuits he preferred not to disclose. The third had links to a corruption scheme in public tenders. Raphael didn't use this information as direct blackmail. He didn't need to. It was enough to let it be known through reliable intermediaries that he knew, and that if the rumors against Laura didn't stop immediately, that information would cease to be private. The rumors stopped. The three businessmen backed down. Laura began to receive the clients she had lost. She only discovered the extent of Raphael's intervention weeks later, when one of the clients casually mentioned how good it was to see that the Almeida Sampaio was supporting her work. Laura connected the dots. She sought Raphael out at his office, arrived without warning and walked straight in, ignoring the secretary who tried to announce her. Raphael was on the phone. He looked up, saw her there, and ended the call quickly. Laura closed the door behind her. "What did you do?" Her voice wasn't accusatory, it was just tired. Raphael stood up. "I protected your interests." She crossed her arms. "I didn't ask for protection." "I know," he answered calmly, "but you deserved justice, and they were being unfair." Laura took a deep breath. "Why are you doing this?" Raphael looked her directly in the eye. "Because I owe it to you. Because I spent 6 years trying to find a way to fix what I broke. Because you are talented, competent, and shouldn't have to fight against the idiotic prejudices of insecure men." He paused. "And because it's the right thing to do, regardless of anything between us." There was a long silence. Laura looked at him as if seeing him for the first time, or perhaps she finally saw who he could have been 6 years ago if he had possessed the courage he demonstrated now. "You've changed," she said, almost to herself. Raphael shook his head. "No, Laura, I just stopped pretending to be someone I never wanted to be." She took a step toward him. Then she stopped, as if remembering all the reasons why keeping her distance was safer. "I need to go," she said. But before leaving, she turned once more. "Thank you for the help, even though I didn't ask for it." Raphael nodded. "You're welcome." And Laura left, leaving him with the feeling that something fundamental had changed between them, even if neither of them yet knew what to do with that change. It was around this time that Fernando appeared in Laura's life. They met at a conference on business management in São Paulo. He was a financial consultant, specialized in mergers and acquisitions, working for a respected international firm. He was 40 years old, conventionally handsome, well-dressed and articulate. He showed interest in Laura from the first moment, but in a respectful way, without rushing. They began to meet for coffee, then dinners. Fernando was attentive, interested in listening to her, and impressed by her trajectory. There wasn't the incendiary spark between them that Laura had felt with Raphael, but there was something safer: stability, compatibility, mutual respect. Fernando came from an upper-middle-class family in Rio de Janeiro, had a solid education, and an established career. There was no drama, no complications, and no ghosts of the past haunting every conversation. Laura liked his company. She liked how she felt when she was with Fernando. Normal, like a normal woman having a normal relationship with a man who saw her as an equal, without the weight of surnames, without social judgments, without buried humiliations that could resurface at any moment. Fernando made her laugh, took her to dinner at good but not ostentatious restaurants, and introduced her to friends who received her naturally. Raphael noticed the change in Laura almost immediately. She seemed lighter in meetings and smiled more easily. And then, during one of the visits to the farm, she answered a call, and he heard the affectionate way she spoke to someone, the soft nickname, the genuine laugh. Raphael felt something twist inside him, jealousy, but more than that, the painful recognition that Laura was moving on, that he had missed his window. that perhaps he had never had a window to begin with, and any illusion of redemption was just that, an illusion. But Fernando was not what he seemed. Behind the perfect facade there was calculation. He had researched Laura before approaching her. He knew about her businesses, her growth, and the potential she represented. He also knew about the land regularization she was conducting for Santa Helena Farm, a valuable property that would soon change hands. Fernando worked for an investment fund that had an interest in land for real estate development. Getting close to Laura was a strategy. He started slowly. He offered help with her business's financial issues. He suggested investments. He introduced her to potential investors. He always positioned himself as indispensable, as someone who opened doors and made paths easier. Laura, focused on work and genuinely appreciating his company, didn't notice the pattern. She didn't see how Fernando was subtly making her dependent on his network of contacts and connections. Fernando's final move came when he suggested that Laura should expand her business to São Paulo more aggressively. He said he had investors interested in financing that expansion. But there was a condition. They wanted a significant equity stake. And they wanted the first acquisition to be strategic, a specific property that would be perfect for a headquarters. And that property, coincidentally, was in negotiations for sale. Santa Helena Farm. Laura frowned when Fernando mentioned it. But that is the property I'm regularizing. The buying group is already defined. Fernando smiled calmly. Groups change their minds. Better proposals appear. It's just a matter of timing and presentation. You could mediate that. It would be good for everyone. For you, for me, for the investors. Something in that conversation bothered Laura. She couldn't define exactly what, but there was a wrong feeling. As if the pieces of a puzzle she didn't know she was assembling suddenly revealed an image she didn't like. She said she needed to think. Fernando didn't pressure her. He kissed her forehead, said there was no rush, that it was just a suggestion. But Laura couldn't sleep that night. She kept mentally reviewing every interaction with Fernando, the strategic introductions, the always convenient suggestions, the way he had appeared in her life exactly when the farm work had begun. She started researching. She discovered links between Fernando's firm and real estate investment funds. She discovered he had made similar moves before. Getting close to people with access to valuable opportunities, creating dependency, then converting it into business. Laura confronted Fernando on a cold afternoon in June. They scheduled a coffee in a public neutral place. She arrived prepared, with copies of everything she had discovered. She didn't accuse him directly, she just presented the facts. The connections between him and the real estate funds. The pattern of strategic approach he had used before. The temporal coincidence between the start of their relationship and her work on the farm. Fernando didn't deny it. He didn't try to explain himself with elaborate excuses. He just smiled, that charming smile she had learned to distrust. Laura, you are complicating something that could be simple. This is business. Good business for everyone. You win, I win, the investors win. Why turn it into something personal? Because it was personal, she answered, her voice firm but with pain underneath. You faked feelings to manipulate a professional situation. Fernando shrugged. I like you. That's not a lie. It's just that I also saw an opportunity. The two things can coexist. Laura shook her head and stood up. Not for me, they can't. She left that cafe feeling stupid. Not for the first time she had allowed someone to make her feel smaller than she was. The difference was that this time she saw the manipulation before being completely entangled. This time she walked away. But the hurt remained. The feeling that perhaps she wouldn't be able to trust again, that every man who approached would have ulterior motives, that the price of her independence was perpetual loneliness. Raphael learned of the breakup 3 days later, when Laura appeared at the farm for a technical inspection, and he noticed she was no longer wearing the discreet ring Fernando had given her. He also noticed the tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided prolonged eye contact, as if she were protecting herself from another wound. He didn't ask. He didn't think he had the right. But when she tripped on a root during the walk through the property, and he instinctively reached out his hand to support her, Laura grabbed that hand with unexpected strength and for a second just stood there, holding on, as if she needed a fixed point not to fall completely. Raphael didn't let go. He waited until she was ready. When Laura finally let go of his hand, she murmured an almost inaudible thank you. That night, Raphael received an unexpected visitor at his apartment, Fernando. He arrived with the confidence of someone who knew he had something valuable to offer. He sat down without being invited, refused the drink Raphael offered out of courtesy, and went straight to the point. "I know about your situation," Fernando began. "I know the family's debts are suffocating you. I know the sale of the farm will cover part, but not all. I know you are months away from having to start liquidating other assets." Raphael felt the anger rise but kept a neutral expression. "And?" Fernando smiled. "And I have a proposal that resolves all of that. My investors are willing to buy the farm for a value 30% above what the current group is offering. Clean money, fast transfer, no complications." "What's the catch?" Raphael asked. Fernando leaned forward. "No catch, just a small favor. I need Laura Mendez to officially recommend the sale to our group. As the consultant responsible for the regularization, her professional opinion carries weight. If she says our proposal is technically more advantageous, the current group won't question it. It's a clean transaction." Raphael understood immediately. Fernando wanted to use him to pressure Laura. He wanted him to choose between saving his own financial situation and protecting her professional integrity. It was a perfect mirror of the choice he had made 6 years ago. Choosing convenience, the preservation of his own position, the easy path, or choosing the difficult one, the right one, the one that would cost everything. 30% more, Fernando repeated, letting the number hang in the air. Enough to pay off all the debts, enough to keep the rest of the companies running, enough to save the Almeida Sampaio name from complete bankruptcy. All you need to do is convince Laura it's a good idea. She trusts you now. She will listen. Raphael stayed silent for a long moment. He thought about his grandfather, about the lessons that the surname came before everything. He thought about his father, about the expectation that he preserve the legacy. He thought about everything he had been taught to value. And he thought about Laura, about the way she looked at him that afternoon when he helped without asking for anything in return, about her hand grabbing his as if he were something solid in a world that insisted on crumbling. "No," Raphael finally said. The word came out simple, firm, final. Fernando frowned. "No? Do you understand what you are refusing?" "I understand perfectly," Raphael answered. "I am refusing to be the coward I have always been. I am refusing to destroy someone to save myself. Again." Fernando stood up, irritated. "You are being an idiot. This is a business decision. Laura doesn't even need to know we talked." Raphael also stood up and opened the apartment door. "She will know, because I am going to tell her, and you are going to stay away from her." Fernando laughed without humor. "You're going to tell her, and you think she'll thank you? She hates you, Raphael. She'll keep hating you. You are throwing away your last chance to save your family for a woman who will never forgive you." "Maybe," Raphael agreed. "But at least this time I won't deserve her hatred. Now leave." Fernando left without another word. Raphael closed the door, leaned against it, and felt the weight of the decision he had just made. There was peace in it. For the first time in years, genuine peace. It wasn't the peace of resignation. It was the peace of finally making the right choice, regardless of the cost. The next day, Raphael sought out Laura. He found her in the office she had set up in São Paulo to coordinate the regularization work. She was surprised by the visit, but received him. He went in, closed the door, and took a deep breath. "I need to tell you something," he began. And then he told her everything, about Fernando's visit, about the proposal, about the attempt to use him to manipulate her. Laura listened in silence, her expression becoming increasingly closed. When Raphael finished, she asked the only thing that mattered. "And you, did you accept?" "No," Raphael said. "I refused." Laura studied him, looking for lies. "Why? You need that money. I know about your family situation. 30% more would be—" "I know what it would be," Raphael interrupted her. "It would be selling myself again. It would be choosing convenience instead of you. And I already did that once. I spent 6 years living with the consequences. I won't do it again." There was a heavy silence. Laura stood up, walked to the window, and stood looking at the city below. "You say you looked for me," she said finally, her voice low. "After that night, that you tried to find me." Raphael nodded, even though she couldn't see him. I tried for months. I went to all the places you mentioned. I talked to everyone who might know where you were. No one knew, or no one wanted to tell me. Why? Laura asked, turning to face him. Why, look, you made it clear in front of everyone that I meant nothing, that I was just another employee who made a mistake. Why look afterward? Because I lied, Raphael said, his voice breaking slightly. That night, I lied to them, I lied to you, I lied to myself. You meant everything. You were the only real thing I had in a lifetime of lies and performances. And when my cousin hinted at something, when my family began to pressure me, when I realized I would have to choose, he stopped and took a deep breath. I didn't have the courage. I chose the easy path, and I've spent every day since then regretting it. Laura felt tears burn her eyes, but didn't let them fall. You humiliated me. In front of everyone, you made me feel smaller than trash. Raphael nodded, his eyes also moist now. I know, and there is no excuse for that. There is no forgiveness I deserve. But I need you to know that it destroyed me as much as it destroyed you. Only your destruction made you stronger. Mine only made me emptier. How you can't throw that on me, Laura said, her voice trembling. You can't make me feel sorry for you. Raphael shook his head. I'm not asking for pity. I'm telling you the truth, for the first time, without fear of how it will be received. He took a step toward her. I love you, Laura. I loved you back then and was too cowardly to admit it. I love you now, and I won't let that mean you need to reciprocate. You deserve someone who was always brave. I'm just trying to be brave now, too late. Laura covered her face with her hands. 6 years, she murmured. 6 years I built an entire life on the certainty that you were just another weak man who chose status instead of feeling. 6 years telling myself it meant nothing. And now you come here and... She couldn't finish. Raphael waited. He didn't try to get any closer. He didn't try to touch her, he just waited. When Laura finally lowered her hands, her eyes were red but without tears. I need time, she said. I need to process all of this. Raphael nodded. As much time as you need. He turned to leave, then stopped at the door. Laura? She looked at him. Thank you for letting me tell the truth, even if it doesn't change anything. He left. Laura stood there in the middle of the empty office, feeling the foundations of the anger that had sustained her for 6 years begin to crack. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was something, a possibility. A door she thought she had locked forever that was now ajar, letting in a sliver of light she didn't know if she wanted or feared. The following days were strange. Laura and Raphael continued working together because the regularization process was not yet finished, but there was a different tension now. It was no longer the cold professional distance Laura had maintained before. It was something more complex, a watchfulness. She observed him when she thought he didn't notice. She analyzed every gesture, every word, every decision, testing, looking for signs that the change was genuine or just another performance. Raphael felt the scrutiny but didn't complain. He knew he had to prove himself, not with words but with consistent actions. He kept his promise not to pressure her. In meetings he focused on work. When there were decisions to be made, he consulted Laura first and respected her professional opinion even when he disagreed. When she needed something, he provided it without expecting thanks, and when she needed space, he backed off. The situation with Fernando had repercussions. He didn't give up easily. He tried to go directly to the original buying group of the farm, offered advantages, and applied pressure. But Raphael, using the last remnants of influence the Almeida Sampaio name still carried, ensured the original group kept the commitment. It wasn't easy. He had to make concessions. He had to accept a longer payment term. He had to agree to sell other family assets to cover the difference the refusal of Fernando's proposal had created. Mauricio, the cousin who years ago had planted the first seed of distrust, appeared furious when he learned of Raphael's decisions. "You are destroying everything our grandfather built," he accused, during a tense meeting at the family holding office. "Because of what, pride? A woman who isn't even—" He didn't finish the sentence because he saw the expression on Raphael's face. A line had been crossed. "Finish that sentence," Raphael said, his voice dangerously calm. And you are out of the company completely." Mauricio swallowed hard. There was something different about his cousin, a firmness that wasn't there before, a willingness to burn bridges that the old Raphael had never demonstrated. Mauricio backed off, grumbled something about business decisions, and walked out, slamming the door. Laura learned of this confrontation through the lawyer, who casually mentioned the internal tensions in the Almeida Sampaio family. She said nothing to Raphael about it, but she noted it. Another concrete action, another bridge burned in the name of protecting what was hers, not his. The regularization work was finally completed in early December. Laura delivered all the documents impeccably organized, with all the necessary signatures, all the certificates, and all the seals. Santa Helena Farm was legal, documented, and ready to be sold. The buying group was satisfied. Raphael signed the final sale papers with a mix of relief and melancholy. It was the end of an era, the end of the ultimate symbol of the Almeida Sampaio. There was to be one last meeting for the settlement of fees and the formal closing of the consulting contract. Laura scheduled it at a discreet cafe, not an office. Raphael arrived punctually. She was already there, with a folder he imagined contained the final documents. They ordered coffee. They sat in silence for a moment. "Everything is here," Laura said finally, pushing the folder toward him. "Everything closed, documented. You can review it with your lawyer." Raphael nodded. "I know everything is perfect. You always do everything perfectly." Laura smiled slightly, a bit bitterly. "Not always. I make mistakes too." Raphael looked at her. "What mistakes?" Laura took a deep breath. "Like trusting too fast. Like Fernando. Like thinking I could distinguish genuine intention from manipulation. Like being absolutely sure about things that perhaps weren't so absolute." Raphael waited, his heart racing, not knowing exactly where that was going. "I've spent the last few weeks observing you," Laura continued, "seeing how you handle pressure, how you treat people when you think no one is watching, how you make difficult decisions." She paused. "You gave up everything, the farm, the status, the family's approval. You burned bridges you didn't need to burn, and you didn't do it trying to impress me. You did it because it was right." "Because it was right," Raphael agreed, "and because I can no longer live being someone I'm not." Laura nodded slowly. "I spent 6 years building an entire life on not needing anyone, on proving I could do everything alone, and I can. I did, but—" She searched for the right words. "But I discovered that not needing and not wanting are different things. Not needing is strength. Not wanting is just disguised loneliness." The coffee arrived. They let it cool, neither of them touching the cups. "Raphael," Laura said, looking directly into his eyes, "I'm not going to pretend that what you did 6 years ago didn't happen. I'm not going to pretend it didn't hurt, that it didn't scar me, that it didn't change who I am." Raphael nodded. "I wouldn't expect you to pretend. I don't want you to pretend. But," Laura continued, "I'm also not going to pretend that you are the same person, because you're not. Or maybe you were always this person and were just afraid to be. I don't know. It doesn't matter. What matters is who you choose to be now. And you chose to be someone who faces the consequences, who protects instead of destroying, who loses everything instead of compromising what is right." "Where are we going with this?" Raphael asked softly, afraid to break the moment. Laura smiled, this time without bitterness. "I don't know, honestly. But I think I want to find out. With you. If you still want to." Raphael felt something inside him unravel, something that had been tense for 6 years. "I do," he said, his voice husky, "more than anything." "But there are conditions," Laura said, becoming serious again. "No hiding, no performing, no choosing what's easiest when things get difficult. Because they will get difficult. Your family won't accept this easily. The society you frequent will judge. They will say things, they will pressure you, and if at any moment you feel it's not worth it—" Raphael placed his hand over hers on the table. "Laura," he said firmly, "I already lost you once because I was a coward. I won't lose you again. I don't care what they say. I don't care who walks away. I don't care if I have to build a completely different life from the one I've always had. Actually, He smiled. "I want a completely different life. I want a real life with you." Laura turned her hand over and interlaced her fingers with his. "Then we have a lot of work ahead of us." Raphael laughed softly. "We do, but I have experience in hard work. You taught me." They stayed there, hands interlaced, coffees getting cold while life happened around them. It wasn't a moment of romantic explosion, of grand declarations, of impossible promises. It was quiet, solid, real. It was the beginning of something built on ruins, but for that very reason it was stronger, because both knew what it was like to crumble, and both had learned to rebuild themselves. The following months were a period of adjustment. Raphael had to face the disapproval of his family. Mauricio led a faction that tried to remove him from the management of the remaining companies. Raphael let them. He left on his own, taking only a small shareholding. He used that money to open his own consultancy, small, focused on restructuring family businesses in crisis. Honest work, without glamour, but it made sense. Laura introduced him to her world, to the owners of small businesses, to the entrepreneurs who came from the bottom, to the people who worked 16 hours a day because they had no other choice. Raphael found himself learning more in those environments than he had learned in all his MBA years. He saw Laura being respected not for a surname, but for competence. He saw how she negotiated without ever being arrogant, how she helped without creating dependency, how she led by example. They didn't move in together immediately. Laura insisted on maintaining her independence, her own space. Raphael respected that. They saw each other when they wanted to, not because they had to. They built a relationship of equals, where no one owed anything to anyone except honesty. There were difficult moments, a disastrous dinner with Raphael's father, who barely looked at Laura and spent the entire night making passive-aggressive comments about questionable choices. Laura endured it with dignity, but in the car on the way home, she broke down. "Maybe your family is right. Maybe you are throwing everything away for—" Raphael stopped the car and turned to her. "For the love of my life? For someone who makes me want to be better every day? For a chance to have something real instead of a beautiful lie? Laura, if that is throwing it away, then let them throw it. There's nothing left that I want to keep." Laura kissed him then, right there in the car parked on the edge of Avenida Paulista. And for the first time, she felt she was kissing someone who chose her completely, without reservations, without conditions, without asterisks. It was Laura who suggested they move in together, a year after that conversation in the cafe. Raphael was surprised. "I thought you wanted to keep your space," Laura smiled. "I did, but I discovered my space is better when you're in it." They chose an apartment together, not in Jardins where Raphael grew up, not on the outskirts where Laura started, somewhere in between, a neighborhood in transformation, where neighbors were young architects, designers, and small business owners, where no one cared about surnames and everyone cared about what you did today. The marriage proposal happened simply. There was no diamond ring, there was no kneeling in a fancy restaurant. It happened on a Saturday morning, the two of them making breakfast together in the new apartment's kitchen. Raphael was making pancakes, and Laura was cutting fruit. He looked at her, at the way the morning light caught her face, at the concentration with which she sliced a pineapple, and simply said, "Marry me." Laura stopped, knife suspended in the air. "What?" "Marry me," Raphael repeated, "not because it's expected, not because it makes sense on paper, but because I can't imagine waking up and not seeing you on the other side of the bed, because you are the only person I want to grow old with, because I love you in a way that scares and comforts me at the same time." Laura placed the knife on the board carefully. "Are you sure? Because marrying me means never going back to that world you came from. It means the invitations will stop, the doors will close, they will take you off the lists, out of the clubs, out of the circles." Raphael approached and took her hands. "Laura, those doors are already closed, and I don't want to go through them again. I want to build something new, with you, just with you." "Then yes," Laura said, smiling with tears in her eyes. "Yes, I'll marry you." The ceremony was small, in the same simple church in Pinheiros that Laura had mentioned years ago. Her siblings came from Minas, shy but happy, a few business friends Laura had made over the years, Two people from Raphael's old life who remained true friends. No member of the Almeida Sampaio family appeared. Raphael wasn't surprised. It didn't hurt as he imagined it would, because he looked at Laura walking toward him, simple and radiant in a white dress without excesses, and he understood he wasn't losing a family. He was gaining a new one. The life they built in the following years wasn't perfect. There were financial challenges when an important client of Raphael's consultancy went bankrupt without paying. There were moments of doubt when one of Laura's restaurants went through a crisis. There were arguments, exhaustion, and sleepless nights. But there was also complicity, respect, the certainty that they were together because they chose to be every day. Raphael learned to see the world through Laura's eyes, to understand the difficulties she had faced, and to value achievements he previously would have considered small. Laura learned that not every man of means was a coward, that vulnerability was not weakness, and that forgiving didn't mean forgetting, but rather choosing to carry the story in a different way. When Laura became pregnant, 3 years after the wedding, they chose the name together. If it were a girl, Helena, in honor of the farm that united and separated and reunited them. If it were a boy, Miguel, a simple name, without the weight of a dynasty, without a legacy of demand. It was a boy, and when Raphael held Miguel for the first time, he looked at Laura and said, "We're going to raise him differently. We're going to teach him that a surname defines no one. That courage is doing the right thing even when it costs everything. That love is worth more than approval." Laura held his hand, looked at the son who had barely arrived in the world, and agreed. "We're going to teach him that the best things in life don't come ready-made. They need to be built, brick by brick, choice by choice, and that it's okay to crumble as long as you get up and build again stronger and truer." Years later, when someone asked how they met, Raphael and Laura exchanged a look. It was a long story, they said, with difficult parts they would have preferred to avoid. But it brought them here. And here was exactly where they were supposed to be. It wasn't the ending young Raphael would have imagined when he grew up believing his destiny was mapped out. It wasn't the ending Laura imagined on that devastating night when she left a luxurious club carrying more humiliation than she could bear. It was better, because it was real, because it was chosen, because it was one with work, honesty, and the courage to be vulnerable. And in the end, they discovered that what seemed like a fall had been, in truth, the only possible path to find the